Lesbian, Gay, and Bisexual Equality in the Military, 1988 to 1993, a narrative. The history of folks who identify as lesbian, gay, and bisexual serving in the United States military has been a very long and complex one. Historically, homosexuality had never been allowed in the military, but it wasn't until 1982 that the military issued a formalized policy banning anybody identifying as homosexual from serving in any of the armed forces. In 1988, this policy was still in place, and despite it being common knowledge that there were, in fact, gay, lesbian, and bisexual service members actively in the military, these individuals were subject to discrimination and discharge if they revealed or if someone believed them to identify as such. The 1982 policy was based on the belief that homosexuals were incompatible with military service. The policy read, "The presence in the military environment of persons who engage in homosexual conduct or who demonstrate a propensity to engage in homosexual conduct seriously impairs the accomplishment of the military mission." The policy cites discipline, morale, privacy, and security as elements of military service that homosexuals would not be able to uphold. The Department of Defense defined a homosexual as a person, regardless of sex, who engages in, desires to engage in, or intends to engage in homosexual acts, and a homosexual act as bodily contact actively undertaken or passively permitted between members of the same sex for the purpose of satisfying sexual desires. Returning to 1988, this was the year in which the LGBT and military communities lost Sergeant Leonard Matlovic. Sergeant Matlovic was the first person to go before the Supreme Court challenging the military's exclusions of gay and lesbian individuals following his discharge from the U.S. Air Force in 1975. Despite having served with distinction, Sergeant Matlovic was discharged after having informed his commanding officers that he was gay. Following a 5-year battle with the courts, he was reinstated into the Air Force and left soon thereafter with an honorable discharge. This is Sergeant Matlovic giving his last public speech at the March on Sacramento for Gay and Lesbian Rights on May 7, 1988.
And I want you to look at our flag, our rainbow flag, and I want you to look at it with pride in your heart. Because we too have a dream. And what is our dream? Ours is more than an American dream. It's a universal dream. Because in South Africa, we're black and white. In Northern Ireland, we're Protestant and Catholic. And in Israel, we're Jew and Muslim. And our mission is to reach out and teach people to love and not to hate. And you know, the reality of the situation is that before we as an individual meet, the only thing we have in common is our sexuality. And in the AIDS crisis, and I have AIDS, and in the AIDS crisis, if there's any one word that describes our community's reaction to AIDS, the word is love. Love. Love.
Leonard Matlovic wasn't the only one. After having re-enlisted in the U.S. Army in 1982, Sergeant Perry Watkins was placed under discharge proceedings in 1984 for having revealed that he was gay. Sergeant Watkins also fought his case and took it all the way to the Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. In 1989, the court ruled that despite the military's ban on homosexuals, Sergeant Watkins should be allowed to serve based on his exceptionally outstanding military record.
When Sergeant Perry Watkins tried to re-enlist after 15 years in the Army, he was rejected because he admitted having homosexual tendencies. He had freely said so in his enlistment application when he joined the Army. Now a federal appeals court in San Francisco has ruled that the military's fear of homosexual conduct is not enough to justify discrimination. Gay rights lawyers called it a major victory.
The court is stepping in and saying, you've gone too far. And I think that's a major breakthrough for us.
The decision sets the stage for an important Supreme Court ruling. In a 1980 appeals court case, Kennedy ruled that the Navy could kick out homosexuals. The Pentagon minimized today's ruling, noting that other courts have decided differently. An appeal is expected. If the decision sticks, more gays might join the military.
The practical effect will be that more lesbians and gay men will now feel free to sign up to join the military, to serve their country, and those that are in the service will feel more comfortable with who they are, that they won't be subject to witch hunts.
Sergeant Watkins' story is significant because of what his fight did in helping pave the way for rights for all LGBT service members, but also because despite these contributions, Sergeant Watkins has historically received less attention for his feat, and in the telling of his story, there is no recognition that his flight was made difficult not only because he was serving as a gay man, but serving as a gay African American man. In addition to individuals fighting for their rights, coalitions were also being formed amongst LGBT service members, veterans, and their allies. In 1990, during the National Gay and Lesbian Task Force Creating Change Conference in Minneapolis, 6 veterans came together to form the National Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Veterans of America. The founding members all came from local groups from all across the country. The group works to advance the rights of LGBT individuals as it pertains to the military, as well as continue to spread local chapters to support service members and veterans all across the country. Today, the group is known as American Veterans for Equal Rights. Despite great work that had been done by activist groups and by some vocal members of government who began to speak about the need to reform the military's ban on gay, lesbian, and bisexuals, attitudes about why they should not serve continued to hold strong.
What is the core basis of these kinds of decisions with regard to women in the military or homosexual? What's the guiding principle about all these decisions?
Guiding principle, first thing, the only thing that really matters in this case is the effectiveness of the military fighting force. And you have to look at all factors. You have to look at the ability to do the job. You have to look at the effect of individuals upon a unit working with other people. You have to look at overall organizational concerns, and both with women and with homosexuals, there are problems that are created by putting them in with heterosexual men that can be avoided and can only detract from the ability of the services to do their job.
In 1992, Alan Schindler, an officer in the U.S. Navy, was murdered by a shipmate while in Japan. Officer Schindler was stomped to death in a public bathroom, and during the trial, it was determined that he had been murdered because he identified as gay. It is also believed that the Navy actively attempted to cover up this case. This event served to highlight the many dangers that the lesbian, gay, and bisexual service members face in the military, especially given the current attitudes by the United States government and a large portion of the public. 1992 also marked an election year in the United States, with Bill Clinton having been appointed as a Democratic nominee. Clinton is credited as being the first presidential nominee to make issues pertaining to gay and lesbian rights part of his political campaign. If elected, Clinton said he would, quote, lift the ban, unquote, on homosexuals serving in the military. The murder of Alan Schindler and Clinton's campaign promises, along with a number of other events happening all throughout the nation, served to energize LGBT military community. The National Gay, Lesbian, and Bisexual Veterans of America continued to work towards supporting and advocating for service members, and by 1992 they had 44 chapters across the country. On April 25, 1993, the military ban on homosexuals became a primary topic of the March on Washington for Lesbian, Gay, and Bi Equal Rights and Liberation. Then, on July 19, 1993, President Clinton announced his new policy on homosexuals in the military.
Under the plan, gays could still be discharged from the service for homosexual acts, but not for simply acknowledging their homosexuality. Under this policy, a person can say, I am a homosexual, but I am going to strictly adhere to the code of conduct.
The new policy came to be known as Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and for many it was a compromise made between Clinton despite his promises to completely repeal the ban as he had promised during his campaign. Among the many problems with this policy is it was also supposed to include a clause about not pursuing, as in not investigating anyone that was thought to identify as homosexual, a point that Clinton omitted in his announcement and that confused the debates about the issue that followed. Despite its flaws, on December 21, 1993, President Clinton signed into law Defensive Directive 1304.26 that directed military personnel from asking about sexual orientation. In 1994, Don't Ask, Don't Tell became official military policy, and just like military policies before it, had a tremendous impact on LGBT Americans serving or hoping to serve in the U.S. military. So what about people of color? As noted earlier, while the story of Sergeant Perry Watkins is a remarkable one, he does not get the credit it deserves. In a 1993 interview, Perry Watkins stated, "Racism within the gay community is a big problem. The primary reason is that we are a direct reflection of the society from which we come, which is controlled by white males. When the gay community was formed and became political, the leaders were white men, and they brought their prejudices with them. Again, despite his contributions, Sergeant Watkins is not spoken enough about in regard to being a leader of the gay rights movement during this time. Even in watching video footage or researching on who the voices during this time were, it is clear that we are missing some important stories. And what about individuals who identify as transgender? Unfortunately, the discussion on exclusion in the military based on sexual orientation is notably missing a conversation about transgender individuals during this time. Fortunately, following the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell in 2011, the conversation about allowing people identify as transgender to serve began, and in 2016, it was established that the transgender individuals would no longer be excluded from service. LGBT history as it relates to the military can clearly benefit from more narratives from this particular group.